So good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Nijkamp. I am the president of the Sonoma County chapter of the National Organization for Women, and we want to welcome you tonight to this very special event. We have Marianne Williamson, who is going to be introduced shortly. I also wanted to mention that today is a very special day. It is the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Pauline Murray. And the Reverend Dr. Pauline Murray was not only an Episcopal priest, but she was first an activist, and she helped co-found the National Organization for Women. So we wanted to make sure that you all knew that she was there. And I was looking to see if her niece, Rosita Stevens-Holtz, is on the call yet. She was coming in, but I don't think so at this moment. However, I did want to mention that. No, she's not in yet. The rules for tonight are pretty simple. If you have questions for us, you can type them in the chat only to the hosts and the co-hosts. And you can also use the reactions icon on the bottom of your toolbar, the reactions to raise your hand. So we will do a question and answer following the presentation by Marianne. I believe it will be an interview with Elaine doing the interviewing of Marianne. So you'll get to hear that. And I think that's all I had to say tonight. I do want to again welcome you all to this very special event, and I hope you'll enjoy it as much as we enjoy having Marianne Williamson on the air with us. Thank you. Elaine, would you like to go now?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. And this is just so exciting to have Marianne on. And, you know, I want you to know that I'm a possibility thinker, and so is Marianne. And about 5 years ago, I had a dream that I was interviewing her on a television station, and here we are today. So I believe in the possibility thinking. So if it's okay with you, Marianne, I would like to introduce you and also tell folks just a little bit about you.
Sure.
Well, for over 4 decades, Marianne Williamson has been a leader in spiritual and religiously aggressive circles. She is the author of 15 books, 4 of which have been on the New York best-selling list, #1. A quote from her mega bestseller, A Return to Love. And I remember when I first heard this, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are so powerful beyond measure. And it's true. She's considered an anthem for a contemporary generation seekers. Williamson's founded Project Angel Food, a nonprofit organization that has delivered more than 14 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients since 1989. In 2004, she co-founded the Peace Alliance and supported the creation of the United States Department of Peace. Marianne is now a candidate for the Democratic presidential election. I mean, hopefully, who knows what's going to happen? Like you said, she's a possibility thinking for the United States of America. If you would like to receive updates for Marianne's presidential campaign, you can visit her at marianne2024.com. Is there anything you would like to add, Marianne?
No, I think that's it.
Well, good. Well, folks, just to let folks do, this has been titled In Conversation with Marianne Williamson, and I have the honor of asking her these questions. If my voice sounds a little bit funny or I'm skipping over, it's because I am so excited I can't handle it. So here's our first question. Marianne, talk about your early work. What was the inspiration for the Course of Miracles, and what were some of your early challenges of bringing this work to the public?
You know, when I was 14 years old, I went to a summer school program, and there was a class and it was called Philosophical Approaches to the Question of God. And I remember being so blown away. It was the first time I ever read anything philosophical. In junior high school, right? 14. And I was always interested in anything that had to do with the higher mind. And so it could be in school reading great philosophical thinkers or theologians, but it could also be the I Ching, it could be astrology, it could be Alan Watts, it could be Ram Dass. I was always interested, whether it was Eastern or Western, whether it was esoteric or exoteric, traditional, academic. It was always just where my heart went, my interests. But it was when I was in my mid-20s that I found a set of books called A Course in Miracles. Now, I believe that there is one truth spoken in many different ways. One truth with a capital T, and then there are all these different religious traditions and spiritual traditions, but there are these universal spiritual themes. But when I read the Course in Miracles, and not that it's for everyone, I don't think any one path is for everyone, but there's really only one path, but the different specific traditional ways into the room, everybody finds what works for them. And when I read the Course in Miracles, what I found was a way to practically apply many of the things that I'd been reading about for years, but I didn't know how to apply those things to my own life. So I just became such a passionate reader of this book. There's nothing in the book. It's not a religion. It doesn't claim any monopoly on truth. But if it's for you, you know it. So I started working as a volunteer in the office where it was published. And then I ended up moving to Houston, and I would give little book club things about it in my bookstore. And then I moved to Los Angeles. And when I moved to Los Angeles, so this is about 5 years after I first started reading it, because I first saw the books when I was in my mid-20s. When I went to Los Angeles, I was working at this place called the Philosophical Research Society. And they used to have these lectures on various spiritual topics. So the woman who was my employer said, I hear you do the Course in Miracles. Could you do lectures? And I was all excited, and I studied so hard, and I just read the book like a fine-tooth comb. I studied it so much, and it was really a moment in my life. So I started giving these little talks on the Course in Miracles on Saturday mornings at this Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles. And then after I had been doing it for a pretty short time, it was like boom, and AIDS exploded on the scene, and particularly exploded in Los Angeles. So in a very real way, gay men in Los Angeles gave me my career, because I was then 31 years old, and I was talking about a God who loves you no matter what. And it was not a religion. There's no dogma or doctrine. And about miracles that happen when we love each other enough. And so all of a sudden, all these people started coming to my lectures. And then we would grow, and it would become a bigger church, and where we would rent a space. And that was how my career began. And then I ended up writing a book based on my lectures. And then we founded nonprofit organizations in Los Angeles, one of which you mentioned. I became very involved with AIDS activism. And then when my book came out in the middle of all that, Oprah Winfrey read it, and she liked it. So then I was sort of off and running. She created that space so that I could write books. And also I continued very much as a nonprofit activist. About 20 years, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, about 20 years later, I moved to Detroit. And by that time, I had a career in which being up close and personal with people in sort of the darkest periods of their lives was what I did. There used to be a joke. Nobody goes to Marianne because things are going well. I was the one you called after, the doctor had already given you the test results, and, it's cancer, or you find out your child is on crystal meth. You've done all the things that have to do with the external issues that need to be applied. And now you have to know how to endure and transform this crisis in your life. But when I when I was a young woman, and when we were going through the AIDS crisis and all those kinds of things, even though I had a lot of experience working with people whose lives were in crisis, the society was such that if somebody's life was in crisis, that was the exception and not the rule. About 20 years later, I moved to Detroit, and I met a lot of people whose lives were in crisis. But I realized two things: that the crises in their lives were not the exception, they were the rule. And I realized how many times it was because of bad public policy. Their life was in crisis because they didn't have health care. Their life was in crisis because they couldn't work just one job. Their life was in crisis because they were terrified sending their kids to school every day. Their lives were in crisis because hunger was a real issue, because they were rationing their insulin. So many things that made me think, wait, what's going on here? And that was when I began to have more of an external orientation as well. I already had an external orientation in terms of founding nonprofit organizations. My field has always been about personal transformation. I did nonprofit activity, founding organizations, raising money, very, very dedicated. But I, at that time when my career began, thought that private charity was enough. And I came to realize, particularly when I went to Michigan, that private charity cannot compensate for a basic lack of social justice. That too many people, like millions of people, like millions and millions and millions of people, are living their lives in this country at the effect of policies that really are predicated on making it easier for those who have capital to have even more access to capital, and harder for everyone else to even survive. And that was when I began to be more politically active in my own life, and not just, supporting other candidates and stuff.
When you talk about the political life, oftentimes when you talk to, say, religious leaders, or you go to a church and they start talking, they don't want to talk about anything about politics. They kind of avoid it. How were you able to move your way through to start talking about some of the bigger issues? And where did you get the confidence? Where did you get the oomph to do that?
Well, I'm doing the same thing now in my mind that I've been doing throughout my career for the last 40 years. This is the thing. We have a tradition in this country of keeping our public dialogue about political issues secular. And I think that's important, and I respect it. And I come from a religious minority myself. I understand how important it is to keep the language a language that anyone can relate to and feel comfortable with. But that was never meant, and shouldn't mean, that you leave soulfulness out of the conversation, or that you leave character or love or generosity or forgiveness or mercy out of the conversation. You leave the language. I don't see anything different. What I'm doing now is what I've done for 40 years. I just don't at the end say, now let's say a prayer. But I hope in a way that everybody feels that the whole talk I had given was a prayer. Gandhi said politics should be sacred. And he didn't mean religious. He just meant it should be from the deepest place of who we are. And what I've noticed in my life, because I've had a career in the field of personal transformation and spirituality, if you go to an AA meeting, or you go to any serious religious or spiritual practice, or Course in Miracles or anything like that, you notice that we're talking from a deep place. We're finding the most heartfelt conversation about our lives. And you go to therapy, and you go to support groups, and you go to AA, and everybody understands that what we're doing here is we're going deep and getting real. And within that place, we're quite sophisticated, actually, about what's going on psychologically. And we speak from our hearts, and we know that that's necessary in order to have a life that works, in order to endure and transform times of crisis. And on that, I think the Americans are really quite good. But when it comes to political conversation, we've all been trained to act and think like sixth graders. We've been trained to keep it very shallow. We've been trained, we're just parroting these stale platitudes that are handed down from whatever political party or ideological silo we align with. And that's very dangerous, because at this moment, this is not a moment to farm out our critical thinking. This is not a moment to farm out our thinking, period, when it comes to the issues we have to decide together. So I'm not interested in leaving the field of depth to go into something shallow. I'm interested in going into a realm that has become traditionally shallow and speaking from depth. Now, I think it's important that people realize that this is an aberration in America, that we're so shallow. Somebody said to me, it was in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was a radio interviewer. And he said, I really love what you're saying, but how are you going to talk like this to the average American? Like, like we were so dumb. And I reminded him that this country elected Abraham Lincoln. Look at Martin Luther King. Look at the things that were said by Franklin Roosevelt. Look at the things that were said by Lincoln. It is actually just an aberrational chapter that we have allowed politics to become so cheap and tawdry and corrupted and dominated by money rather than real democratic and humanitarian principles. My sense, not just my hope or my feeling, but my experience when I'm out there, is that people are hungry for that. If you eat junk food long enough, you're like yearning for salad. If you find yourself just watching so much crap on TV at a certain point, well, is Masterpiece Theater on? And I think that's where we are with politics. It's like people know that something is wrong at a deeper level. People get that. And I think that there's a hunger out there. When I always in my career, this is how I have always done my career. I decided many, many years ago, when it came to my career as a speaker, and this was from the very beginning, that my rule for myself was I want to say things that if I were sitting in the back row, I would be impressed. Not of other people, because I remember many years ago, when I lived in New York, I was in my 20s, and I used to go hear cabaret singers all the time. And I noticed sometimes that I would go hear a singer, and everybody was so excited by her. And I was saying, well, I don't know why everybody's so excited. But then other times I'd go and I'd hear this absolute genius, some jazz singer or something. And everybody around me was talking. And I'm like, do y'all not get what genius is here? And I thought, no, if I'm ever on that stage, I want to imagine myself in the audience. Is this what I would want to hear? And that's how I feel about politics. I want something more deep, more soulful. And that's what I try to bring to the process. And I think that's what Americans want. Americans realize something is wrong. People ask me, what's the difference between your campaign last time and this time? And that's that I think people realize something's wrong. Something's wrong at some deeper level. And I find an openness to a conversation that's beyond the transactional, beyond just talking about symptoms. People realize we're deeper, and I think people are ready to do that.
Can you give an example of what you mean by depth and what you really feel that the American public is wanting to hear? And because there's a lot of resistance, you hear a lot of different stories, like, oh, if you run, this is going to happen, and you're going to spoil things. Someone's going to get. How do you overcome some of those things? And what are some of the things that you believe are the depth that you want to bring forward?
Well, you just mentioned something about my being a spoiler. I'm running in the primary.
That's what, of course.
You're running in the primary. You can't be a spoiler if you're running in the primary. And I think that narrative is almost shameful, that, that's what those who do not wish me in the conversation have put out. But you can't be a spoiler if you're running in the primary, but be that as it may. An example of treating symptoms rather than root cause. So let me go back a little. The political system is stuck in a paradigm that's very 20th century, and that's very mechanistic, that the world is a machine, and if you want to fix things, you just tweak the machine. The 21st century paradigm is much more whole person. You realize that there's an inner life as well as an outer life, and what people are experiencing within is as important as what's going on the outside. First of all, because what people are experiencing on the inside creates so much of what's going on the outside. So our politicians, the political establishment, only wants to talk about the externalities, only wants to talk about symptoms. They don't want to talk root cause, because if you talk about root cause, you're liable to see how often they are the root cause. So they'll want to talk about violence. They'll want to talk about mental health. They'll want to talk about all kinds of problems that maybe they would address with an issue. What they don't want to talk about is the economic injustice that permeates our country. And the despair that arises from this, the fact that there's been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth over the last 50 years into the hands of 1%. When you have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, when you have a third of Americans living on less than $15 an hour and half of them can't even find a place to live, when you have half of America's seniors living on less than $25,000 a year, which is poverty, when you have elementary school students on suicide watch, when you have over 1 million people rationing their insulin, when you have 70% of Americans saying that they live with chronic economic despair, when you have 62% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, when you have so many people crippled by debt, when you have so many people living in a way that it's almost as though their lives are falling apart, and this is in the richest country in the world, then you've got something wrong. And what you've got wrong is that we now routinely pass laws where issue after issue, we make it easier for those who have money to make more and harder for anyone else to even get by. We talk about the mental health crisis. Really? You can't overstate how much economic anxiety plays in to what we call the mental health crisis. So I think that 20% of us in the United States live in an economy that works for us, and I think that's to be celebrated. But outside that 20%, there's a huge sea of economic despair and real human suffering out there. And our political system basically doesn't talk about it because mainly, for one thing, most of those who are doing the most suffering don't vote. They've given up. They don't feel that the country cares or does anything for them. And it's increasingly unsustainable. When you have large groups of desperate people, that becomes a petri dish out of which all manner of societal and personal dysfunction is almost inevitable. And that includes vulnerability to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. You can't just create a world that only works for a few at the expense of the many and expect that to work out full time.
You know, it's interesting when you say that, because when you look over the centuries, that's the way it's always been. I mean,
Thank you very much. You know, what you're saying is so important. Like, everybody needs to read a little history. This has never worked out. Read about the French Revolution, because the rabble is closer to the gates of the Bastille than our political elite have any idea. To say they're in a bubble is such an understatement. Washington is like a walled city. There's something about being in that system that emotionally buffers people from the real suffering that's going on out there. And we're doing exactly, the Democratic Party is doing exactly in 24 what happened in 2016. There's a complete blindness, an unbelievable blindness to what's going on. And just no, we're going to just make sure our candidate wins, even though in this case, a candidate's tanking in the polls. Because there's a refusal to really listen to the voice of the people, or even to allow the voice of the people to be expressed. And this is the thing that I find so fascinating, Elaine. And I ran last time and running this time. It's very clear to me, the people are not the problem. You know, if you look at where we are in the polls, that we talk about such division, but if you actually look at the polls, the majority of Americans are a little bit left of center. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. Not as many as Democrats, but a majority. And a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. And a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want common sense gun safety laws, and that includes gun owners. But the system, what I call the political media industrial complex, doesn't want to allow anyone in who's bringing a truly anti-corporate domination message. And you know, it's interesting, this is a group of women. In my career, throughout my career as a writer and everything, I never felt being a woman was a limitation of any kind, or that I never felt anything like that felt misogynistic or anything. In politics, they will say things about a woman they would never say about a man. They will pull narratives about a woman. They will lie. They will smear it in ways that they would never with a man. It's really quite extraordinary. And in my case, just completely erased, just not even mention her. I'm higher in the polls than the majority of those Republican candidates, but no, nothing to see there. Nobody's running.
Let
Really-
let me ask you another question. One of the things that's been going on in the media, when you talk about the media, they keep saying that we have a moral problem. There's a moral issue here. Now you're talking about the immorality of what's happening is the fact that you have the have and have nots the way you have it.
That's right.
How do you get to the public to understand that that is happening without making some sort of judgment like you're a socialist, you're a communist, you're this, you're that? I mean, how do you avoid all that?
First of all, people are not stupid. You simply say it. You say it. People, this is not something, this is the thing. I don't find that people aren't open to a deeper conversation. It's just that the political system doesn't really want to offer people a deeper conversation. I don't find that people don't want to hear that. And of course, if they call you a socialist, I mean, that's the oldest PR con in the book. They called Roosevelt a socialist. I mean, you know, he said, I welcome their hatred. I mean, it's a joke when, you know, you know, that's the thing about the Democrats. The Democrats, the corporatist Democrats won't stand our ground. You know, the Republicans, you criticize them, they say it again. The Democrats, too often, people criticize us and we run away from what we stand for. Look at what's happening at the southern border, right? Because I was just recently in Eagle Pass, Texas. So what you see there is the most racist. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas is like a racist cop. That's all that's going on down there. So whereas 150 years ago, keep out the Jews, keep out the Polish, and keep out the Irish. This is all about keeping out Latinos. That's all that's going on down there. The Democrats are like, instead of creating a genuine counter narrative, which is saying that this is nothing but racism. The American foreign policy has contributed to much of the economic destabilization. Our sanctions in Cuba are contributing to this. Our sanctions in Venezuela, we are hurting people. People are escaping violence that is created by these drug cartels, and it's our drug war that in many ways supports that by fostering that black market. I don't find people don't want to hear it. When I say, and then people who are traumatized so much that they are, in order to escape the economic despair, in order to escape the violence, are willing to walk across a desert, walk across the Darien Gap, which is probably among the most inhospitable pieces of land on the planet, with little children, in order to get here. And when I say people who are traumatized where they came from, if I'm president, they will not be traumatized again when they reach the southern border of the United States. I saw that place in Eagle Pass at the Rio Grande River. 1,500 people drowned there last year. 800 have drowned already this year. I don't find audiences don't care. I think audiences are horrified. We are a decent people, but politicians don't go there and they don't really tell you the truth. And the corporatist Democrats don't, because they're playing to some mythical center. They're afraid to be called a socialist. Just who cares?
Well, it's like Gary Cole-Licker says, what you think of me is none of my business. You know, I mean,
well, I think politicians, I think to be a righteous politician, you have to think that. And that's what we need. We need a president who's not acting according to focus groups. We need a president who's not part of that system. We need a president who's not even running for a second term, because you wouldn't even be thinking about, will you get reelected if you do this? We need a president for whom that system cannot do anything. That's why I think there has to be someone from the outside. We have a matrix of corporate overlords: insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big chemical companies, big agricultural companies, gun manufacturers, defense contractors, and big oil. And it is a system of economic tyranny in this country. The governing principle of this country is now short-term profits for huge corporate entities. And that is at the expense of the health and safety and welfare of the American people and the planet on which we live. Every other advanced democracy has universal health care. Every other advanced democracy has tuition-free college and tech school. They don't have carcinogens in their food like we do. It's outrageous. Talk about abuse. And it's interesting because I find so many people who say in their private lives, their personal lives, well, I don't stand for abuse. So why are we standing for this abuse? We're entranced. We're like, we think we're powerless, but really we're only powerless until we burst through the illusion.
Well,
This is
when you talk about powerlessness, I personally, on a personal level, think the most important thing about you is the fact that you uplift and give courage that we can speak out, we can think of another way. So why not give, during this conversation, just a few ideas of how people can overcome some of their fears, start looking at things a little bit more realistically. And for myself, for example, when I thought of Trump, one day I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, which she's ragging on. I said, don't you realize that for the past 50 years, we've been voting for the lesser of two evils? Well, now we have the most evil because that's how it works. But I know for myself, I've had to go through different spiritual aspects to have the courage to speak out and the courage to be silent, even, the courage to do something, to be on the radio. So if you could give us just some hints, like what you learned through the Course of Miracles, what people can do during this time of trauma and during this time of really making some strong selective decisions.
Okay, so this is what I think. We're a bunch of adults on this call. We're not children. We have allowed ourselves to be infantilized. You don't think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma were traumatized? You don't think those women who marched for suffrage and were thrown into prison because of it, for whom the prison conditions were so awful that they went on a hunger strike, and the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions onto their necks and force feed them. Do you know what our ancestors have gone through? Do you know, you think that the abolitionists never had desperate days? You think that women's suffragists never had depressed moments? You think that the early labor organizers or the civil rights movement, what made us so soft? I think we all have to toughen up. We're the adults in this society now. So when you say what gives us courage, I know it gives me courage. Get over yourself, Marianne. It's not about you. That is the best, that's the best piece of advice anybody has ever given me. Get over yourself. Get over yourself. It's not about you. What is you being asked to do that can compare to what a woman under the Taliban has to go through? What are you being asked to do that can compare to what women in Saudi Arabia have to go through? So I just think we all need to, I think we need to coddle our own neuroses and our own pathologies and our own fears a little too much. I think that when I talked before about wanting to think that if I was performing, that if I was in the back row, I would be impressed. Act in such a way that people you respect would respect you. And it is a moment for courage. It actually is a moment for courage. The data, we have the data. When I was talking before about all the suffering and all the poverty and we have over a third of Americans who report that they regularly skip meals. And we're scared. I mean, it's outrageous. We need to not coddle that in ourselves, and we need to not coddle it in each other. That's how I.
Go ahead.
What are you afraid of? Listen, I know I'm in the belly of the beast right now. I wake up every morning to some lie about myself, some insult, some smear, some online bullying. But once again, what's that compared to what a woman in the Taliban has to go through? And I think women have deep-seated fear of disapproval. There's a level of get over it that's needed here.
Well, it's really interesting because I totally agree with you, the point about when you say what a woman is going through in another country or what we went through to do to get the vote. I do a part of my show. It's called Our History is Our Strength. And I always say the reason that I'm saying this is because I want to show you what women went through, because I believe that as women, and I want to know how you think about this. I believe as women, let's go to the spiritual aspect. Let's say there's a creator or whatever the universe creates. We were brought forward to bring forward children. You have a daughter, I have a daughter too. And you have a granddaughter also, so I'm a great grandmother. So you can imagine how I feel when I look at another generation, and I feel what's looking ahead for them sometime. But I believe women have been created and we bring forth life. And I think what you're talking about is ways to stand out and stand up for that life. So what other suggestions would you give? Like, okay, you get this phone call, you find out somebody is saying, oh, Marianne's this, Marianne's that, like the same thing about me. I have a reputation in my activist community is I'm a woohoo thinker. Like, okay, whatever you want to think. I love woohoo. But what do you do when you get that phone call? Do you meditate? Do you say a saying? Well, how do you get yourself out of that, not being angry or not feeling sorry or not feeling scared?
Well, I have those moments, but she's a crystal lady. I've written 15 books. Crystals, the word crystal's not in any of my books. Crystal's not in any of my talks. It's the lies. It's people who are going to believe that are going to believe that. People who have come to hear me speak or who actually know me. And anybody who thinks that aren't lies on the internet, I almost feel sorry for them. I read it on the internet. Really? You read it on the internet, did you? So, it's been very dangerous for me in the political space because it has thrown a lot of fairy dust in people's eyes who then won't even come hear me. But even though there's been this media blackout, I'm rising in the polls. Higher than most of those Republicans, which is pretty amazing given the media blackout. So, yeah, I mean, it's so insulting, to have things said about you that are. But once again, I say to myself what I've said to you: get over yourself, Marianne. There's something more important going on here.
I get over you.
Get over yourself, Marianne.
Right. I totally agree. Well, I'm looking at the clock, Marianne, and I wonder if we should open it up now for some questions. I mean, you've really just given a lot of oversight and a lot of good information that I can really appreciate. And again, I just want to remind people that Marianne wrote this book called Imagine, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book to read. Gives you all kinds of ideas. You're not only listening to her, you're listening to some of the people that she gathered in this book. It's just amazing. So I just want to put a plug in because I love it so much. So, Amy, are we ready to open up for questions? Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. And Rebecca will be covering those. And if anyone has any questions, otherwise, please use the reactions button to raise your hand and we'll call on you as you, in the order in which you raise your hand. So Rebecca, why don't we start with the two that are in the chat?
Okay. All right. Jane is asking about getting into any debates by the primaries.
It's so ridiculous. The Democratic Party, so let's talk historically. Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution. And George Washington, in his farewell address, warned us about them. He said that he feared they would become factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. So traditionally, the Democratic Party or any political party stays in the background, and then the people decide who they want a nominee to be. And then the party comes forward to support the nominee. But the Democratic Party now is unabashed in its declaration that they see their job as reelecting Donald. Right, the way they're acting, you think they were trying to reelect Donald Trump, to reelect Joe Biden and to nominate Joe Biden. And so they have said that there will be no debates. They have manipulated the primary schedule. They do all kinds of shenanigans, to be honest. And so no, they are not planning any debates. and then they're sort of minions on CNN and MSNBC. The fact that I'm not on this time is just extraordinary, even to the point where they just outright lie. You remember after when Trump was inaugurated, right? And Sean Spicer, remember Sean Spicer, the press secretary? He comes out and he says, we had more people at our inauguration than have been at any other presidential inauguration, right? And so the press showed these pictures. There were so many more people at the Obama inauguration, right? And his response to that was, we had more people at our inauguration than at any in history. It's just a big lie. And to watch them talk about the president as though he has no opponents, when I've been there since March, when I'm climbing in the polls, and they'll just say, I'm not there, or she's not viable, or she's not qualified, because what they call qualified is qualified to perpetuate and maintain the system as it is.
Well, you're over 35 years old.
In the Constitution, it says you have to be 35, you have to have lived here for 14 years, you have to be 35 years or older. It doesn't say you have to have been a governor or senator or house member or a lawyer, because the founders were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself what they feel is the skill set most required to answer the challenges of a particular time. I don't believe that the only people we should consider qualified are people who have had years of experience driving the car that drove us into this ditch, as though those are the only people we should trust to drive us out of the ditch. It makes no sense to me. We don't need, they act like you have to be a political car mechanic. But the problem is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics. We have very good political car mechanics in this country and in Washington. The problem is we're on the wrong road. The problem is where the car is driving. And that's why Franklin Roosevelt said that the biggest job of the presidency is not administrative, but moral leadership. The system, the economic system, an economic system should serve the people. The people should not serve an economic system. And the economic system that we have allowed to dominate the last 50 years of American history is soulless. It is amoral. It is short-term profits for huge corporations, no matter who gets sick and who dies, to be honest. At what point are we going to step in and intervene? Because the political system as it is will not intervene. Because ever since Citizens United, particularly, there is so much money that they do more to answer and respond to their donors than to their own constituents. It really turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. And for us to just keep voting for these people, talk about abusive relationships. It's like a man who cheats on you, and every 4 years it comes back, oh, baby, give me one more time. What?
Okay.
The status quo will not disrupt itself. That is now the status quo, that level of economic injustice and the maintenance of a system where there's this level of not only income inequality, but even capacity to pursue happiness inequality is baked into the cake, and that system will not disrupt itself. And, my qualification is not that I know how to maintain and perpetuate that system. My experience is that I know some things about how to disrupt it.
Well, do you believe that running these different programs have brought you a lot of experience in organizing and getting people to do things, etc.?
Absolutely. And Elaine, more than anything else, it's that I have been with people as much as I have at the darkest times of their lives. I understand the personal dimension of crisis. And I know what it takes to endure and transform crisis. And all that a country is a group of people. The same psychological processes apply. This country has to look in the mirror. You have to look at yourself in the mirror. You have to ask, where am I? Where am I not what I say I am? Where do I need to clean up the past? Where do I need to be willing to change? Where do I need to be willing to course correct? That's what I want to help the country do. Because until we address those deeper dimensions of our hypocrisy, our selfishness, our public policy that does not express the angels of our better nature, we will continue on the road we're on, and it is a path of decline.
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at all the wars that they're going on across the country. And one of the things that I keep coming out with is how the children, the women and children are suffering. And I think people don't recognize that if it's happening over there, it could happen over here. It's like if one child is killed in an automobile accident, any child could be. So now we have seat belts and we have seats that we put the children in. It's the same thing with war. We're suffering over here, but it's not going to stop. We're kind of snobby in America because we've never been touched by that. And we went so hysterical with 9/11. And I thought even in 9/11, I was thinking, well, why don't they bring that up? That we're doing X amount of things over there and it's coming back to roost us. So I just wanted to make that little comment. Do we have another question, Rebecca?
Yeah, there's a couple more questions. How much time do we have? Are we okay?
We've got about 15 more minutes.
Okay, Dusty is asking about your experience. What has she done by way of politics and what will you commit to? What bills, what legislation, and generally about your experience and solutions to not being allowed into the debates?
If anybody looks at Marianne2024.com and looks at my issues, I have more policy positions. Really, what is the president saying that his issues are? All he's saying is, let's finish the job. There's nothing there about what he would do for the next 4 years. My policy positions are very well articulated on my site, and they are the following. I have taken the Economic Bill of Rights that was articulated by Franklin Roosevelt. I've updated it for the 21st century. Universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, subsidized childcare, paid family leave, universal sick pay, guaranteed housing, and guaranteed living wage. In addition to that, I want a Department of Peace. We need a peace academy, just like we have a military academy, where peace builders, and I think a lot of people don't realize that peace building is an actual thing. There are 4 factors, and when these factors are present, statistically, there's a higher level of peace and a lower level of violence. And those things are, and this is much what you were saying just now, Elaine, those 4 factors are, number 1, greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, a reduction of violence against women, and an amelioration of unnecessary human despair. So we need a peace academy, just like we have a military academy. And we need to learn, even Donald Rumsfeld said, to wage peace. We need to imagine a world at peace 100 years from now and seek to reverse engineer from there. We need to proactively cultivate peace, just like you proactively cultivate health. You can't just not take care of your body, and then when sickness inevitably comes, just hope that you can always eradicate or suppress the symptoms. The relationship of sickness to health is the same as the relationship of violence to peace. Violence is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of violence, just like sickness is the absence of health. So you proactively create health through nutrition and so forth, and you proactively create peace through justice and brotherhood and love. I want a Department of Peace. I want a Department of Children and Youth, because our children, we have elementary school students on suicide watch. Mm-hmm. We have around schools all over the United States, they have trauma rooms. We have trauma-informed education. We need to ask ourselves, why is childhood in the richest country in the world such a trauma for millions of children? We have children who are traumatized before preschool. We have to start in utero. We have such a high infant mortality and maternal mortality, particularly among Black women. Children are not old enough to vote, so they're not considered a constituency. They're not old enough to work. They have no financial leverage, and they are just collateral damage of this malfunctional capitalist system that is now the strain of economic system that dominates this country. And the last major peace platform that I want to end America's drug war. This was started in 1971 by Richard Nixon. John Ehrlichman, when he came out of prison, spilled the beans. Clearly, Nixon knew that drugs were not public enemy number 1 at that time. He was doing this to, for one reason, to attack Black communities, according to Ehrlichman. We spent $1 trillion on the drug war. It has not done anything to solve the problem. It has exacerbated it. When I was in college, we had 300,000 people incarcerated. Today, we have 2.3 million. And 46% of all federal offenders are nonviolent drug offenders. Those people should be home with their children. And we should treat drug addiction, which is now such an ubiquitous problem. We have so many deaths of despair. And addiction, that kind of addiction, is a disease of despair. We should treat it as a health issue, not as a criminal issue, the way they do in countries like Portugal. We now spend $100 billion a year on the drug war, and for a fraction of that, we could have a world-class network of recovery options. I don't want a drug czar. I want a recovery czar. And I think it's also important to realize that this will help down at the border, because that will help undercut the black market, obviously, the market of the drug cartels. So it's interesting, because when I say what I want, and you ask what has been my experience has led me to say the things that I just said. They're not saying them. And the people in Congress who believe what I just said, they're not running. And they're not running because they're standing in line like good little soldiers, because they're tied to the system. And until the DNC says that it's okay for them to run, they're not going to run, which is very interesting, because if they come in now, they're going to say that we should trust them to take on the insurance companies, or to take on the pharmaceutical companies. They wouldn't even take on the DNC. So the experiences of my life have led me to a point where I find a hungry child in America intolerable. That's my experience. That I find the economic despair of a majority of people so that a few people can be rich in this country unacceptable. And my experience has led me to be someone who, despite the insults, despite the derision, despite the suppression, refused to shut up about it. And I think that's what we need in a president right now, in my opinion.
Oh God, we need a big team. We will not be silent.
Well,
no,
seriously. You know
seriously.
what? I'll tell you something, Elaine. Let me tell you something. Women are not being silenced now so much as choosing silence.
We were going to play a song by Earth Mama.
It's internal. What's keeping us quiet now?
Kind of interesting. I was going to play a song by Earth Mama called "We Were Made for These Times." And as I listen to you, I feel that what has to happen is we all have to just stand up and just have courage, be the people that we want to see happen. So do we have another question? Go ahead.
There's a few more questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. There's a woman wondering if you can possibly debate with the independents. It doesn't sound like you can if you're running with the Democrats, right?
I'm sorry, what was the beginning of the question?
She's asking whether you can arrange for a debate with the independents who are running.
I don't think that would be the right thing to do as a Democratic candidate.
Yeah, I think
I'm running as a Democratic candidate, and I don't think I should be helping to platform an independent at this point. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Here's a question from Andrea. I believe you were in support of reparations for African Americans when you ran the last time. Will this be a part of your platform this time?
Absolutely. If you go to, once again, to go to Marianne2024.com and look at issues, you'll see that. You know, I was talking before about the same psychological principles that prevail within one life prevailing within a country, because all we are is a group of individuals. In an individual life, you cannot have the future you want if you don't clean up the past. And that's the context in which I view reparations. There is a debt still owed.
Okay. Magic is asking if you're aware of the rights of nature and how this could shift the paradigm by ending ownership of our lands as the bottom line. Are you aware?
I don't know anything
get
about
Magic
that.
to speak live on the Zoom. I don't know if she has her hand up. So let's hold on that one, see if Magic pops up. Dusty is asking if you have organized communities to affect change.
Absolutely, very much I have. You know, one of the things that you that you mentioned in the introduction. I founded an organization in Los Angeles called Project Angel Food, which served meals to homebound people. It started with AIDS and continues with any critical illnesses. It has now served over 16 million meals. That's a lot of organizing of a community. I hosted the Sister Giant conferences. Yes, I think that I've had a lot of experience as a nonprofit activist, and yes, I think that my 40-year career has been very much about moving hearts and moving people.
Here's another question from Dusty. Do you have a position on ranked choice voting?
Yes, I very much support ranked choice voting. I think it's important.
Great.
They have it now in Maine and I think one other state.
Yeah. Here's a question from Madonna. What is your stand on the Native American babies that were taken to boarding school and are buried that never made it home? And what is your plan for hiring Native American liaisons to reach the Native America population?
Well, in terms of those babies, I mean, I think that the history of genocide and of the Native Americans is well documented. I think Americans realize the horrors that occurred there, including the boarding schools, including all the ways in which we took children from their parents. Canada, I think, has really modeled for us the sort of depth of mea culpa and atonement that has been made. And I think we need to follow suit on that. When it comes to Native American society, the question isn't so much reparations. When it comes to Native American justice, it has to do with broken treaties and weak treaties. We should give back. In 1864, we had promised in a treaty to return the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux Nation, and we should do that now. You can do it. It would not disturb the government of South Dakota. So we need to give back the Black Hills of South Dakota. I see a few of you know that issue quite well. And we should have, we're talking about the poorest of the poor in the United States. And of course we should have those liaisons. And I would be very, very aware. It is people to whom much is owed. And of course, much of the issue now has to do with mineral rights, water rights, and land rights. And I would definitely be on the side of our indigenous neighbors, including with the pipelines, where most of that is centered today. I would be on their side.
Amy,
I would like to break in for a moment because Magic has their hand up and I am just needing them to unmute.
Okay. Marianne, thank you for being able to be the courageous woman you are. Rights of nature is actually in the Constitution of Ecuador and in New Zealand and Bolivia. And there's 200 cities across the United States that have this in their general plans. So the idea is the lie that capitalism stands on is that we own the earth. The indigenous people never felt that. It was sacred. We have a sacred relationship. So the rights of nature is not the right of a human to want to protect nature. It's actually standing, they have standing in court. It was first done by William O. Douglas, Chief Justice, as in a minor decision that trees have standing. The river has a right to exist and to thrive. So the more people that create this, it's a very organic way to undermine capitalism.
Well, that's, it's also very much what people are discovering about the witch trials, about how pagan culture, before the earliest dispensation of Christianity, the idea was that humanity was in divine partnership with nature. The earliest dispensations of Christianity introduced the idea that God had given earth to man to use for his utilitarian purposes.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why those women needed to be destroyed, why the whole pagan culture needed to be destroyed. For that
We're still here.
Well, but we've been trained to be nice.
Yeah.
And, there are all kinds of theories about that. Do we have the cellular memory of the witch burnings and so forth? But this is, and obviously that's not the Christianity of today. And even then, we want to remember that even in the Bible, when they interpreted it to mean that the earth could be used by man was to be correct stewards of the earth. There's also the ecocide ecocide legal cases that are being brought now. So I will look up what you said specifically. What you
Thank
say,
you.
Ecuador and
The
Bolivia,
rights of nature.
rights of nature. And I think that you're right. I think that phrase is in the Constitution, the rights of nature and the laws of man. But there is something, isn't there?
I don't believe so. If it is, we should dig it out and use
Laws
it.
of nature and the laws of something. But yes, thank you for telling me about that. And I will
Yes,
certainly.
please. I
That's
appreciate
certainly
it.
the consciousness of today, and it's certainly the consciousness of young people living today.
Yeah, because we want to all feel interconnected. That's what's killing us, is we don't feel the direct connection. So that resiliency can bring
Well,
us.
that's the history of the so-called witches who were called they were the wise women,
the
and
women.
they held aloft in their communities rituals and ceremonies which kept the human being within a sense of sacred partnership with the earth and the sky and the land and so forth. And the destruction of those cultures was because such women raised passionate, free-thinking children who
Right.
became passionate, free-thinking adults who were very difficult to manipulate and almost impossible to control. So there is the rising of the feminine. The rising of the feminine values is very much a reclamation of our sacred connection to nature.
Oh yeah, we're doing the rituals. We're back.
My mother, when I was a little girl, my mother used to say that a woman's greatest responsibility was to her children and her home. And I grew up thinking my mother was really retro and regressive, and I wanted to be cool and out there. And the older I got, the more I realized my mother was so archetypally correct. It's just that at this time we realize to say that our responsibility is to our children, it's to everybody's children.
Right.
To say our responsibility is to our home, to me, means to the home we share, and that is the earth itself. And I do believe that's a woman's calling.
Well, thank you very much, Magic, for your question.
You're
We do have one, Dusty. I know you've had several questions, so I'm going to move to some other people who haven't had a chance yet. All right, first, people of color who have disabilities often get second-class medical treatment. How do you plan to improve this?
Well, first of all, I want to have universal health care. We need a Medicare for all type system. And it should be absolutely within the system that no one should have. I mean, that's just systemic racism. That's not even about healthcare. That's just about racism. And racism and racist policies and racist policies are usually racist policies are covertly racist. They don't call themselves racist, but we must be ever vigilant to recognize the ways. Usually that has to do with the fact that there is not enough subsidized healthcare in neighborhoods that do not have necessarily the financial means to have the hospital there, does not have the financial means to have the healthcare center there. We have a hospital industrial complex, and it's just another, spawn and tentacles of hyper-capitalism. And, if it's not going to make a lot of money for there to be a hospital there, they're not going to build a hospital. If there's not going to make a lot of money to put an urgent care center there, they're not going to. That's where the government should be in to ensure that all Americans would have the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the first.
I just want to interrupt you. I'm looking at the clock. It's 7:03, and how much time? I think, how many more questions do we have?
I've got a couple on chat.
Would that be okay with you, Marianne, or do you want to?
We've got more, so I don't know how much farther you want to go, but anybody who has questions, you can either put them in the chat and we can get them to Marianne because the chat is saved.
I see that woman Tarney has had her hand up.
Yes, and I will unmute her.
Yes, thank you very much. I put it in the chat, but I guess that didn't work. So nuts and bolts is economy, right? Where's the money going to come from? Nuts and bolts, it's the economy. Where is the money going to come from to do all these things? So it seems to me the key problem is the control that corporations have over. They write our laws, they buy our politicians. It's huge. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, in 2017, they passed a $2 trillion tax cut. 83 cents of every dollar went to the highest earners and highest corporations. That tax cut should be repealed. The middle class tax cut, part of it should be put back because it should have been there to begin with. First thing, you repeal that tax cut. We also pay billions of dollars in subsidies to corporations that are already making profits of billions of dollars. We should cut those subsidies. And I think that we could also cut some of the defense budget, and we should also have a wealth tax. If you have $50 million of assets, I have no problem asking for another 2% in taxes. If you have $1 billion, then I have no problem asking for another 1%. It won't affect your great grandchildren. You do the things I just said, and you have some cash on hand. But
But how do you get people in government who actually will vote for that kind of thing?
First of
Because
all,
they're controlled, right?
not
Controlled by the
well,
corporates.
first thing you elect a president who's not controlled, who doesn't and is only running for one term, and is not part of the machine. There's nothing they can do for me. They can't take away my position on the Appropriations Committee. I'm not part of it. It's going to take someone from the outside, actually. And they say, oh, well, we did that with Trump. But the problem was not that he came from the outside. The problem was that he had no respect for the traditions of democracy. And he still doesn't, even less so, if anything. But I want to say something else, if I might. Everything that I'm talking about, whether it has to do with universal health care, whether it has to do with tuition-free college, will, even reparations for that matter, will actually grow the economy. And including, if you have universal health care, businesses don't have to handle it. There are so many people in the United States who work at jobs that they hate. They just hate them. They're there only for the benefits. And the fact that people are depressed, the fact that people are not happy, means that our creativity is squashed, our productivity is squashed. The fact, for instance, if you remove these college loan debts, let these kids in the game. So many of these people, all they wish they had $2,500 to start their own website, to start their own business, and so forth. So everything I'm talking about actually stimulates the economy. When they want to invade a country, they never ask how much it would cost.
That's a point that I think is very important. I noticed when they all of a sudden what happened between the wars that are going out, all of a sudden 15 billion going here, all this money going out. And I thought to myself, where are they getting this money? And there's no vote, no discussion, no nothing. So I mean, it's a real issue.
Because that's not how money works. It's not like a piece of pie, not on the federal level. On the state level, there's an actual budget, just like you and I have. And if you spend money here, you won't have that money. That's not how it works on the federal government. It's numbers on a machine. So the problem is not, but some people also think, well, if we weren't fighting in Ukraine, let's say, then we would have the money for healthcare. This does not have to do with how much money we have. It has to do with the consciousness of the people who are making the laws. And of course, they would have us believe when it came to healthcare that it's an issue of, it's complicated. It's not complicated, it's just corrupt. It's the institutionalized greed of the insurance companies. You could bring the money home from Ukraine, you still have the institutionalized greed of the insurance companies, the institutionalized greed of the pharmaceutical companies, the institutionalized greed of big oil, the institutionalized greed. Institutionalized greed is our problem. And we need to stand up to institutionalized corporate greed the way our ancestors stood up to slavery, stood up to the Gilded Age, stood up to the institutionalized suppression of women and the institutionalized suppression of Black people in the American South. It's our turn now. It's our turn now.
Jeffrey has his hand up, and I think that needs to be the last question we will.
Let's give Marianne a few moments to do last words, to anything you'd like to say, anything you'd like to share. And this has just been wonderful.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, sorry, I hadn't unmuted you.
Oh, thank you. I've heard of a huge crisis in child abductions and slavery. And is this true? And is it on your radar?
Child abductions? What are you talking about specifically here in the United States?
Yeah, child abductions and slavery. Yeah.
Well, sex slavery, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
There was a documentary that completely impacted my life several years ago. It's called Sex Slaves in the Suburbs. We had previously, most of us, perhaps, I certainly know myself, had been led to believe that most of the sex slavery, most of the abductions had to do with people who had, that were preyed upon, who came here from other countries. But you're absolutely right. A lot of the missing children in this country, clearly we have a problem. We have a serious problem. What happens a lot is that you have to, when these kids disappear, and there's some horrifying stories, and you're absolutely correct, here in this country, if a child disappears, you really need to be on it statistically in those first 48 hours. But too often the police at that point are saying, well, maybe she went out with her boyfriend, or, so then that turns a lot of parents into vigilantes because they know their child and they know that their child would not have left and not come home. Unfortunately, according to FBI reports and so forth, what you're saying is true. Now, what I also know is that when I did have some access to information about this, the law enforcement people that I heard speaking about it on a call that I was privy to were saying that this was not something they don't know about, but something that they don't have the adequate resources to tackle. And when I said that I would have a Department of Children and Youth, to me, that would be part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering all these tons of questions. If you wouldn't mind one very last one.
Okay.
There's been a question of what ranked choice voting is.
Ranked choice voting is, and they have it in Australia, and they have it, like we were talking about, in Maine, and I think somewhere else. Ranked choice, you get to say not only who your first choice is when you go to vote, you say who your first choice is, but you say not only who your first choice is, but if I can't have that person, then who your second choice is. And it really has a profound effect on the way elections turn out.
Thank you. Do you have any last things you'd like to say before?
Yeah, I would just like to quote Lincoln a little bit. Let me quote Thomas Paine too. Thomas Paine said, "We have it in our power to begin the world again." He begin the world over again. I think that the worst thing that's happened to us is that we've allowed the system to limit our political imagination. We've been trained to expect too little. And in our personal lives, we talk about, imagine anything you want, you can have anything you want, you can have the life you want. We have to think you could have the country you want. We have to imagine a country in which there are no poor children, there are no hungry children, there are no hungry Americans, where our democracy is thriving, where our land is repaired. We need to rise up to that. And I want to remind you also about a line from the Gettysburg Address. With the Battle of Gettysburg, this was the battle after which it was declared, everybody got, we're going to win, the Union's going to win. So with the results being what they were, Lincoln actually went to the battlefield and he wrote and then gave the Gettysburg Address. In the Gettysburg Address, he said that the men who had fought for the Union, he said, had given their last full measure of devotion. He said, so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. And that was the whole thing about slavery. You can't have all men are created equal. Governments here to secure rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and have slavery. Is government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. I'm running for president because it's perishing now. We're not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. If we were, we would not have the carcinogens in our food that we do. We would not have the toxins in our air. We would not have the forever chemicals in our water and so forth. We are at this point a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. And that's why it is said we're not really a functioning democracy right now. We're a functioning oligarchy. A few people who, because of their wealth and power, are able to really use the US government and the taxpayer money that people work hard for in order to enrich themselves at the expense of the majority of people. And there's only one way to override this at this point, and that's through a revolution at the ballot box. And so I hope that you will consider voting for me in your primary. I hope that you will consider going to Marianne2024.com. Volunteer, financially contribute, do whatever is in your heart to do. We are a ship that's on the way to the iceberg. And the way I see it, the Republican Party is headed straight there. And the corporatist element of the Democratic Party is just going there more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. We have to intervene. We have to cut the cord with the aberrational chapter of American history that is trickle-down economics and neoliberal economic philosophy. And we need to begin again. we need to turn the ship around. In my 4 years that I'm respectfully asking you to consider giving me, I could not turn the ship around completely, but I feel I could get us around the curve. I could get us around the curve and then hand the baton to a younger generation who could take it from there. A baby boomer should not be president in 2028, but I could really kick ass in those 4 years. So I appreciate very much you giving me the opportunity to tell you how I see this. You know, a campaign is a long job interview, and you interviewing the candidates too, and they'll tell you, well, this is what I do with the job if you give it to me. So thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Marianne Williamson.
you.
Thank you for having the courage to speak out like this and to step up and say, you know, our children are the future, and I'm here to make sure they have one. So thank you.
Thank
Well,
you so much.
Thank you
Are
so
y'all
much.
all in Sonoma, California? Really? Are
We're
you?
in- we're in wine country, and if you ever want to come here, we have a spare bedroom.
Yeah, thank
We'll
you.
put you in. So
California's
thank
my
you
heart,
so much.
actually. Thank you so much, everyone.
And
Thank
Marianne, thank
you.
you
God
again
bless.
for
Have a
staying
beautiful
up so loud, so late for us. And I want to thank the National Now and California Now for promoting this event for us, and especially to Women's Spaces. Elaine and Ken are both working. Elaine is the host, and Ken is co-host of that wonderful show that brought you Marianne Williamson tonight. So
Thank you.
Elaine, did you want to say one last thing tonight?
Well, like I said, Marianne's a possibility thinker, and I had the dream, and here we are. We had a wonderful, wonderful interview, and I want to wish you much, much success and any support I can give you. I just know that.
Thank you,
And
Elaine.
thank your assistant, Lauren.
I
Oh,
will.
yes.
Lauren, tell her thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think I drove her crazy, but that's okay. We got along very well, and I tell her thank you, thank you, thank you.
I will tell her that. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.